Chris Gardner was a family man living in San Francisco in the early 1980s. He had a wife named Linda and a little son named Christopher. The boy was about 5 years old. Chris loved his family very much. He wanted to give them a good life. Some time ago, Chris had a business idea. He thought he could make good money by selling special machines. These were portable bone density scanners. Doctors could use them to take pictures of bones. The machines were new and high-tech. Chris believed every doctor would want one. So he used all the family's savings to buy many of these machines. He thought this would be a smart investment. He hoped to sell them fast and make a good profit. But things did not go as Chris had hoped. The scanners were very expensive. Chris had to pay for them each month. He had borrowed money to buy them. But doctors did not want to buy the machines. They said the scanners cost too much money. They were nice to have, but not really needed for their work. Some doctors said they could manage without such expensive equipment. So Chris spent his days going from one hospital to another. He tried hard to sell just one scanner. But it was very difficult. He would walk into clinics and offices. He would show the machine to doctors. He would explain how it worked. But most doctors just said no. Money was becoming tight for the family. Paying the rent and bills was a constant worry. Every evening, Chris would pick up Christopher from the daycare center. The daycare had a name painted on the wall outside. But someone had made a spelling mistake. The word happiness was written as happiness. Chris noticed this every day when he came to get his son. He often thought about that word. What did happiness really mean? He was not feeling very happy these days. But he told his son that one day, they would find true happiness. He believed that if he worked hard enough, things would get better. One day, Chris was walking in the city. He saw a man get out of a beautiful red sports car. The man looked very successful and happy. He was wearing a nice suit. He walked with confidence. Chris was curious about this man. He went up to him and asked, "What do you do for work? How can I do what you do?" The man smiled at Chris. He said he was a stockbroker. He explained that to be a stockbroker, you need to be good with numbers. You also need to be good with people. You help people invest their money in the stock market. The man said the job could pay very well. This conversation was very important for Chris. He saw a new path for his life. He wanted to become a stockbroker too. He thought maybe this could be the way to a better life for his family. But life was still very hard. One day, Chris was trying to sell a scanner to a doctor. He met a hippie street musician named Bob. Bob was playing guitar on the street near the hospital. Chris left the scanner with Bob for just a moment. He thought it would be safe. He only turned his back for a few seconds. But when he turned back, Bob was gone. He had run away with the scanner. Chris was shocked. He ran after Bob as fast as he could. He chased Bob into a subway station. But there were too many people in the crowd. Bob disappeared into the mass of people. Chris lost him completely. This was a terrible blow. The scanner was worth a lot of money. It was a big part of their savings. Chris felt hopeless. How could he be so stupid? How would he get the scanner back? At home, things were getting worse every day. Linda was working 2 jobs just to help pay the bills. But they still could not pay everything. The bills kept coming in the mail. The landlord wanted the rent money every week. Linda was tired all the time. She was scared about their future. She was angry at Chris. She thought his scanner business was a complete failure. She could not take the stress anymore. They argued often about money. One day, she made a very hard decision. She decided to leave the family. She said she was going to New York to start a new life. Chris was very sad and hurt. But he could not make her stay. She had made up her mind. The most important thing for him now was Christopher. He wanted to keep his son with him no matter what. He told Linda firmly, "Christopher will live with me. I will take care of him." Linda agreed and left. Now Chris was alone with his young son. He had to care for Christopher every day. He also had to work hard for their future. He still wanted to be a stockbroker very much. He applied for an internship at a big company called Dean Witter Reynolds. It was a famous and respected stock brokerage firm. He was happy when he got a chance for an interview. This was a big opportunity for him. He prepared for the interview as best he could. But then something unexpected happened. Just before the interview, Chris saw Bob on the street again. Bob was carrying the stolen scanner. Chris had to get it back. It was their only valuable possession left. He ran after Bob with all his strength. Bob saw him coming and started to run too. Bob jumped onto a subway train that was leaving the station. Chris jumped on just as the doors were closing. They fought over the scanner on the moving train. Other passengers watched but did nothing. Bob finally let go of the scanner and ran away through the train cars. Chris got the scanner back at last. But now he had a new problem. The train doors had closed and the train was moving. Chris could not get off. He was trapped on the train, going away from his interview. He was wearing casual clothes because he had been working. He even had paint on his shirt from some painting work he did earlier to make a little money. He looked terrible for an important job interview. As soon as the train stopped at the next station, Chris ran back to the company as fast as his legs could carry him. He arrived at the office completely out of breath. He was sweating and his clothes were messy. He looked like he had been in a fight. The business partners looked at him with great surprise. They asked him to explain his appearance. Chris had to think fast. He decided to tell them the complete truth. He said, "I have been sitting here for the last half hour trying to think of a good story. I wanted to tell you something that would show I am a good person. Something about being hardworking or honest or a team player. But I could not think of anything good enough. So here is the simple truth. I was trying to sell a bone density scanner. Then I had to chase a man who stole it from me. That is why I am dressed like this and look so messy." The partners were surprised by his complete honesty. They were impressed by his determination to get back what was his. They decided to give him the internship. But the internship was not an easy thing. It was a training program without pay. The program would last for 6 months. There were 20 men in the program with Chris. At the end of 6 months, only one person would get a real job with a regular salary. During these 6 months, there was no money at all. Chris had to learn everything about the stock market. He had to make many phone calls to find new clients. He had to work very long hours every day. And he had no money coming in to support himself and his son. This was a very difficult situation. Chris still had some bone density scanners left from his old business. He tried to sell them whenever he had free time. He would carry one heavy scanner with him everywhere. But it was very hard to find buyers. Soon, he could not pay the rent anymore. The landlord got very angry. He put all of Chris and Christopher's things out on the street. They were evicted from their small apartment. They had no home to go to. This was the beginning of their hardest days together. Chris had to find a place for them to sleep each night. He discovered a homeless shelter called Glide Memorial Church. The church gave free beds to homeless people every night. But many people wanted those beds. There were not enough for everyone. To get a bed, you had to line up outside in the late afternoon. If you came late, all the beds would be taken and you would have nowhere to sleep. So every day after his internship work, Chris would hurry with Christopher. They carried all their things in one old suitcase and one bag. They would stand in the long line for hours, hoping to get a bed. Some nights they were lucky. Some nights they were not. On the nights when they could not get a bed at the shelter, Chris had to find other places to sleep. One terrible night, they slept in a public bathroom at a subway station. Chris locked the door from inside. He put down some paper towels on the cold floor. Christopher lay down on the paper and Chris held him close. People outside were banging hard on the door. They wanted to use the bathroom. They were angry. Christopher was very scared. Chris held him tighter. He told him stories to take his mind off the scary noise. He talked about good things and happy times. Chris felt very sad inside. Tears came to his eyes in the darkness. But he could not give up. He had to keep going for his little son. Another night, they slept at Chris's office in the company building. He told Christopher it was a cave. He said they were cavemen looking for a safe place to sleep. Christopher liked this game. It made him feel better about their situation. In the morning, they washed up in the office bathroom quietly. A kind janitor saw them but did not tell anyone about it. Chris had to keep this a secret from everyone at work. If the company found out he was homeless, he might lose the internship for sure. Through all these very hard times, Chris never stopped working hard. He worked more hours than anyone else in the program. He made more phone calls to potential clients. He always smiled and was polite to everyone. He carried his suit carefully so it would stay clean. He also carried the heavy scanner everywhere he went. He tried his very best to be a good father to Christopher. He protected his young son from the worst parts of their situation. He tried to make every day feel like an adventure, not a disaster. He never let Christopher see how scared he really was. One day, while they were standing in the long line for the shelter, a man in a nice car stopped nearby. The man saw Chris with the scanner and became interested. He asked Chris about the machine. He might be a potential client for Chris's stock business. Chris could not talk long then because he had to keep his place in the line. But he took the man's business card and promised to call later. This small thing gave him new hope. Maybe things would get better soon. The weeks passed by slowly. Chris's clothes became older and more worn out. But he kept his spirit strong inside. The last month of the internship finally came. He was very tired from working and from the hard life on the streets. But he kept going every day. He finally sold the last of his bone density scanners. That was a big relief and gave him some money. But he still did not have a real job. He still had to wait for the final decision from the company. Finally, the last day of the 6 months arrived. Chris was called into the office of the head partner. The partner was in a meeting when Chris arrived, so Chris had to wait outside. He sat and waited nervously. He saw other interns leaving the office one by one. Some had big smiles on their faces. Some looked very sad. Chris's heart was beating very fast. He had done everything he could possibly do. He had made more than 500 phone calls to find clients. He had learned everything about the job. There was nothing more he could do now. He just had to wait and hope. After some time, the head partner came out of his office. He looked at Chris and said, "Chris, please come in now." Chris stood up and went into the office. He shook the man's hand politely. They both sat down in chairs. The partner looked at Chris for a moment. He said, "These 6 months have been very hard for everyone. We are not known for being easy on our trainees." Chris felt very nervous inside. He thought he might hear bad news now. Then the partner said something unexpected. He said with a small smile, "I think you will agree that you wore some nice shirts during this time." They both smiled at the small joke. It broke the tension in the room. Then the partner became serious again. He looked directly at Chris and said, "Tomorrow is your first day as a real employee. This is just the beginning for you." Chris could not believe what he was hearing. He had gotten the job. After all the hard times, he had succeeded. Chris's eyes filled with tears of joy. He could not speak for a long moment. He just shook the man's hand very firmly and strongly. He said thank you many, many times. He walked out of the office onto the busy trading floor. Now he was one of them. He was a real stockbroker. He had done it. He had succeeded against all the odds. He walked outside onto the busy city street. People were walking by quickly, all looking happy and busy. For the first time in a very, very long time, Chris Gardner felt true happiness inside his heart. He started to cry with joy. It was a mix of relief and joy and being very tired from the long struggle. He raised his hands up and clapped slowly. He looked up at the blue sky and felt very thankful for this moment. That afternoon, he went to pick up Christopher from the daycare center. He hugged his son very, very tightly. Christopher was the reason he never gave up during the hard times. They walked hand in hand down the street together. They had survived the hardest time of their lives. They had a real home now. They had a real future ahead of them. They had each other, and that was the most important thing. This story is completely true. It really happened to a man named Chris Gardner in San Francisco. It shows that if you work very hard and never give up, you can overcome almost anything in life. If you love your child deeply, you can find strength you never knew you had inside yourself. Happiness is not always easy to find in life. Sometimes you have to chase after it with all your strength. Sometimes you have to work very, very hard for it. Sometimes you have to wait a long, long time. But if you keep trying and never stop believing, happiness can come to you too. For Chris and his little son Christopher, happiness finally came knocking on their door.